The morning had started like any other, with sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows of the office building, reflecting off polished floors and the neatly arranged desks. People were moving in and out of conference rooms, phones were ringing, and the usual buzz of productivity filled the air. She walked briskly down the long hallway, her heels clicking softly but purposefully. Carrying a small stack of papers that seemed to weigh more than they actually did, her face was calm, almost unreadable. But her mind was racing with thoughts that demanded action. She knew what she had heard earlier in the day and the weight of that. Knowledge pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy stone. She had spent years in the company, moving quietly from one position to another, always careful, always observant, and always aware of the subtle currents that flowed beneath the surface of the corporate world. Most people thought she was just another assistant, someone who filed reports and arranged schedules, but she had learned to see the invisible. She had learned to notice the pauses, the half-smiles, the sideways glances that often said more than words ever could. When she reached the boardroom, she noticed the CEO already seated, flipping through a set of reports with a practiced, distracted air. He looked confident, almost untouchable. A man who had built the company from the ground up, and who carried himself with the certainty of someone who had earned his place at the top. Yet as she observed him, a strange tension gripped her chest. She could not shake the feeling that today was different. Something was not right. She moved closer, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of the table as she leaned in. He looked up, raising an eyebrow, and offered a polite smile, expecting a casual greeting or a comment about the agenda. But instead, she whispered just above the sound of the murmuring executives, "You need to leave now." The words seemed to hang in the air, fragile yet urgent, like a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a table. For a moment, he did not react. His eyes searched hers, trying to understand if she was joking, if she had lost her mind, or if she truly believed there was something to fear. Then, instinctively, he reached out and gripped her hand. It was a brief touch, but it carried with it a sudden surge of surprise, a silent acknowledgement that something serious was unfolding. The room continued around them, oblivious. Executives discussed quarterly results, charts were presented, and the hum of conversation filled the space. But between the two of them, time seemed to slow. She could see the subtle shift in his expression, the flicker of doubt that replaced the usual calm confidence. He trusted her more than he had any reason to, and in that trust, she felt a quiet determination solidify. Earlier that morning, she had been in the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee, when she had overheard voices that would change everything. To senior managers, voices low and hurried, were discussing plans that no one else should have heard. Their words were carefully chosen, but laced with a threat that could have destroyed the CEO's career in an instant. They spoke about manipulating data, creating false impressions, and timing everything to make it look inevitable. She had frozen at first, unsure if she had imagined it, but the clarity of their intentions quickly erased any doubt. She had considered reporting it immediately, but the idea of being dismissed or ignored was not lost on her. Instead, she chose caution, watching and waiting, observing patterns, and seeking confirmation. The final piece fell into place just moments before the board meeting, and she realized she could not remain silent. The warning could not wait. Her hand tightened slightly in his, a subtle gesture that conveyed both urgency and reassurance. She saw the confusion in his eyes, the disbelief, and yet she knew he felt the seriousness behind her warning. It was a rare moment when words were insufficient. When a simple touch could convey more than 1,000 sentences, he finally nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough to indicate his understanding. Together, they rose from their seats, carefully navigating the maze of chairs and tables that separated them from the door. As they stepped out into the hallway, the hum of the meeting faded behind them, replaced by a quiet corridor that felt almost surreal in contrast to the chaos they left behind. Once outside, she exhaled a breath she had been holding. A mix of relief and tension, knowing that this was only the beginning. The city stretched beyond the glass doors, bright and indifferent, unaware of the silent crisis that had just been avoided. He glanced at her, still gripping her hand, and for a brief moment, there was no need for words. The trust between them, built over years of shared challenges and quiet observations, had reached a point where action outweighed explanation. They moved quickly, almost instinctively, toward a quieter corner of the building. She explained in careful, measured words what she had overheard, giving just enough detail to convey the danger without causing panic. He listened, the initial surprise on his face slowly giving way to a focused determination. The weight of the situation settled on him, heavy and real, but he did not panic. He had learned to face challenges head-on, and now, with her warning, he had the advantage of foresight. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom, the meeting continued, oblivious to the narrow escape. Reports were discussed, charts displayed, and voices argued. But none of the executives suspected the shadow that had passed through their midst. Outside, the two of them began to formulate a plan. Combining her careful observations with his knowledge of the company and its systems, they moved silently, quickly, and with purpose. Knowing that every second counted, she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, a mixture of fear and resolve. Years of experience had taught her how to remain calm under pressure, how to observe without being seen, how to act decisively when the moment demanded it. And now, all of that training, all of that preparation was being put to the test. He turned to her at one point, his grip still firm but no longer surprising, and said quietly, "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't warned me." His voice carried a sincerity that resonated deeply, and she nodded, acknowledging that this was far from over. They both understood that the danger was still present, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The hallway seemed longer than usual as they continued to walk, the sounds of the city outside faint through the thick glass walls. They reached an empty office, one rarely used, and closed the door behind them. Here, they could speak freely, plan their next steps, and prepare for the challenges ahead. She laid out what she had heard in precise detail, noting the individuals involved, the timing, and the potential consequences if nothing was done. He absorbed every word, his mind moving rapidly, calculating, assessing, and planning. For years, he had built the company with vision and strategy. But today, the strategy required a different kind of skill, one that relied on trust, intuition, and the courage to act before the threat became reality. In that quiet office, a partnership formed, silent but powerful. She had acted without hesitation, guided by instinct and knowledge, and he had responded with trust and respect. Together, they represented a force that could counter the hidden danger, a team bound by circumstances and an unspoken understanding that sometimes survival required more than expertise. It required instinct and courage. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they discussed their options, weighing risks and deciding on a course of action. Each choice carried weight, each movement held significance, and the gravity of the situation was ever present. Yet, amidst the tension, there was a sense of clarity, a focused determination that only comes when two people understand the stakes and the trust between them is absolute. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the city, they prepared to re-enter the world outside their temporary refuge. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a confidence born from action and clarity. He felt a deep appreciation, a recognition that leadership was not just about making decisions, but also about listening, trusting, and acting decisively when guided by those who see what others cannot. The moment had passed, but the day had just begun, and both knew that the warning, the hand grip, and the silent understanding would shape the events to come. In the quiet aftermath, as they stepped back into the bustling office, the world appeared the same, yet everything had changed. The game had shifted, and they were ready to face it together. United by instinct, courage, and the unspoken bond formed in the briefest, most critical of moments, the quiet office where they had taken refuge felt like a world apart from the busy chaos of the main building. She sat down in a chair by the window, letting the soft light wash over her face as she tried to gather her thoughts. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, unaware of the invisible storm that had just passed. Inside, the tension lingered like a thick fog. She could feel it pressing in from every direction, a reminder that the danger had not vanished. It had only been delayed. She started from the beginning, carefully explaining what she had overheard. Her voice was steady, even though inside her chest, a nervous rhythm pulsed. She described the words she had caught, the planning and plotting that would have led to disaster if it had not been intercepted in time. She told him about the subtle signals she had noticed in the morning, the unusual access requests, the nervous glances, the hidden agendas of people who smiled in public but whispered in secret. Every detail mattered, and she recounted each with precision. He listened intently, leaning forward with his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on her as if by understanding every word he could see the threat clearly. It was rare for someone to notice the subtleties she had picked up, and rarer still for him to respond without skepticism. He asked questions, probing for specifics, and she answered without hesitation. Their exchange was quiet, but the room seemed charged with electricity, the kind that comes before a storm. She spoke about the two senior managers who had conspired, their careful manipulation of data and personnel, their calculated moves to discredit him. She explained how the timing of everything was crucial, how one misstep could have allowed them to take control of the narrative and frame him for failures he did not commit. Each revelation made the situation feel more urgent, more dangerous, but also more manageable now that the warning had been given and he had acted on it as she spoke. He began to sketch out mental strategies, considering ways to protect himself and the company without causing panic. He was a man accustomed to making decisions, but this required a different kind of thinking. It was not just about profits or reports. It was about reading people, anticipating moves, and countering them before they could act. He realized that her instincts had given him an advantage that few leaders ever had the gift of: foresight. She remembered the first time she had truly understood the weight of corporate power and influence. It had been years ago, watching a similar situation unfold with another executive. She had learned that appearances were deceiving, that the calmest surface often hid the strongest currents below. That lesson had shaped her, made her observant, cautious, and ultimately willing to act when action was necessary. Today, all of that experience converged in a single moment. He asked her if she was certain. She assured him she had not imagined it. The voices, the plans, the deliberate steps, it was all real. She could describe it in a way that left no room for doubt. He nodded slowly, appreciating her honesty and the courage it took to speak up. Leadership was lonely in many ways, but in that room, with her insight and quick thinking, he felt less alone than he had in years. They discussed potential outcomes if they did nothing. Her voice carried the seriousness of someone who had seen what could go wrong. It's the kind of seriousness that comes not from fear, but from experience. He weighed her observations against his knowledge of the company, all the patterns of behavior he knew from years of running the organization. They began to piece together a picture of the threat, careful to cover every angle, consider every variable. Each thought, each idea built upon the last. Forming a protective framework, she suggested checking access logs, surveillance footage, and digital records. Things that would normally go unnoticed, but could reveal unusual activity. He agreed, noting the importance of documenting everything. They worked quickly, coordinating with trusted colleagues who were discreet but capable, ensuring that no move they made would alert the conspirators. Every step had to be precise, measured, and deliberate. The smallest mistake could undo their careful planning. Her attention to detail was remarkable. She remembered who had been in which room, at what time, which systems had been accessed, and the unusual behavior that otherwise would have seemed innocuous. She pointed out discrepancies, oddities that only someone with her observational skills could notice. He absorbed it all, thinking ahead, planning how to counter potential attacks, and ensuring that no false narrative could take hold. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. They had moved from reactive to proactive, transforming the initial panic into a plan of action. She felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, knowing that her instincts had been correct, that her warnings had made a difference. He felt a renewed sense of control, a clarity that came from knowing the danger and having someone he could trust completely to navigate it with him, outside the office. The building continued its daily rhythm, people moving in and out. Unaware of the storm they had narrowly avoided. She and he remained in the office, preparing for the inevitable challenges that would come when the rest of the company realized what had almost occurred. They did not speak much, relying instead on a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that the real work was only just beginning. They reviewed the actions of the two senior managers. Considering every possibility and preparing for countermeasures, she noted their likely next steps, the moves they might attempt to regain control or cover their tracks. He appreciated her insight, recognizing that she had seen patterns he might have missed in his busy schedule. Together, they anticipated, planned, and strategized, forming a partnership that was based on trust and mutual respect rather than hierarchy. The day wore on. But neither felt fatigue. The adrenaline kept their senses sharp, and the focus on the task at hand created a rhythm that was almost meditative. She had never felt more alive in her role, more aware of her capabilities, and more certain of the importance of speaking up when it mattered most. He had never felt more grateful for having someone who could see the invisible, who could act decisively when subtle signals demanded it. At one point, they paused to drink water, their movements deliberate but calm. The city beyond the glass windows looked serene, almost mocking in its indifference to their urgent calculations. But within the walls of the office, the stakes were clear, and their resolve was firm. They had avoided disaster once, but they knew the danger was still present, lurking. Waiting for a moment of weakness, they began mapping out a sequence of protective measures, setting up checks and balances to monitor unusual behavior. She suggested methods of quietly gathering evidence without alerting anyone, and he approved each measure, understanding the importance of discretion. It was a delicate balance, ensuring safety and stability without creating suspicion or panic. Their strategy required patience, observation, and precision. As the afternoon sun began to shift, casting long shadows across the office, they reviewed everything they had uncovered. Every action, every conversation, every anomaly was noted. She felt the weight of the responsibility, but also the satisfaction of acting on instinct, of being prepared when the moment demanded courage. He felt a renewed appreciation for the value of careful observation and instinctive judgment, qualities often overlooked but now undeniably crucial. They discussed possible outcomes if they confronted the conspirators, directly versus continuing to gather more evidence. Each option had risks, but the combination of her insight and his authority provided a rare advantage. They decided that patience and careful documentation would be their strongest allies. Acting too quickly could reveal their awareness and provoke the very scenario they were trying to prevent. Throughout the day, she noticed subtle shifts in his demeanor. He was calmer than she had ever seen in the face of such a threat, focused not on panic, but on the steps needed to ensure security. She felt a deep respect for him, a recognition that true leadership required not just knowledge, but the ability to trust others, to recognize when their instincts were correct, and to act in concert with them. By late afternoon, they had constructed a clear plan, a framework that could be executed with precision. They had identified vulnerabilities, potential triggers, and contingency measures. Every possible scenario had been considered, and yet they both knew that surprises were inevitable. The real test would come in the moments when theory met reality. Before leaving the office to check on the company's systems personally, she paused, looking out the window at the city. The world seemed ordinary, unaware of the near miss, and yet she felt a quiet triumph. She had acted when it mattered most, had spoken despite the risk, and had been heard. It was a small victory, but one that carried immense significance. He turned to her, offering a simple nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that conveyed respect and gratitude without words. It was a quiet moment, a recognition of the bond formed in crisis, and the trust that now defined their interaction. Neither needed to speak further. The partnership was understood, solid, and ready to face whatever came next, as they prepared to return to the wider office. The sense of urgency remained, but it was tempered by strategy and clarity. They moved together, methodical, deliberate, their eyes open to every detail. The path ahead was uncertain, but they had gained something invaluable: insight, preparation, and trust. And in that moment, those three elements were more powerful than any threat the company might face. The office corridor seemed unusually long as they returned from their private space. Every step they took echoed against the walls, a subtle reminder that the rest of the building was alive. Unaware of the danger that had brushed past moments ago, she walked slightly ahead, eyes scanning the surroundings, noting the minor changes, the odd pauses, the people who lingered just a little too long in doorways. She had learned that vigilance meant noticing everything, and now, more than ever, it mattered. He followed closely, hands in his pockets, thinking ahead, replaying the warning she had given him, weighing the implications of the near miss. He was a man who was accustomed to making decisions, but today, the decisions required a different skill, instinct, and trust in someone who had seen what he could not. Together, they made an unlikely pair: the experienced leader and the observant assistant. Quietly navigating a landscape of potential threats, they reached the main office floor and paused near the security monitoring station. Screens displayed the usual flow of activity: employees moving between rooms, security doors opening and closing, and the occasional maintenance staff checking systems. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Yet with her keen eye, she noticed anomalies that could easily have been dismissed. A badge swiped at an unusual hour, door left slightly ajar, and someone standing near the server room longer than necessary. Each irregularity was a thread that could unravel a much larger plot. She pointed out the oddities calmly.
Oh.
He listened, nodding, acknowledging that these small details could make a significant difference. They were not just pieces of evidence. They were warning signs, clues that needed to be connected before the larger picture revealed itself. It was a game of observation and deduction, and they both understood the stakes. They moved together toward the conference room, where she had overheard the dangerous conversation. Her mind replayed every word, every tone, every pause. She could almost see the conspirators pacing, whispering, plotting the steps they would take to ensure their plans succeeded. It was one thing to hear the words, but quite another to predict the consequences. She had done both, and now she needed him to act on her insight. He took a moment to step into the room, eyes scanning the layout, noting points of entry and exit, the placement of tables and chairs, the routes people might take. He realized that timing had been everything and that her warning had prevented him from walking straight into the trap. The reality of the situation hit him fully now. A single misstep could have led to humiliation, professional disaster, and personal turmoil. The gravity of the narrow escape anchored his thoughts, sharpening his focus. They returned to a quieter office, away from the public eye, to review the evidence and strategize. She pulled out notes she had made in her mind and on scraps of paper, detailing every suspicious action, every unusual comment, and every subtle hint of deceit she had observed over the past few days. He listened intently, offering insight where his experience could complement her observations. It was a delicate collaboration, each relying on the other's strengths to build a comprehensive understanding ours past as they pieced together the puzzle. She noticed patterns that indicated who might act next, predicting movements and potential lies before they could be spoken. He assessed the impact of these actions on the company and his reputation, identifying weak points and areas that required immediate protection. The interplay of intuition and strategy created a framework that was both robust and adaptable as they worked. She recalled the subtle signs she had noticed earlier in the week: a shift in tone during casual conversations, unusual requests for data, and employees lingering around sensitive areas. Each observation had seemed insignificant at the time, but in the context of today's warning, they formed a clear map of hidden intentions. He was impressed by the clarity and precision of her attention. Realizing that her insight had saved not only his career, but potentially the company from a serious crisis, he decided that immediate steps needed to be taken to secure critical information. They created a list of priorities, identifying the most vulnerable areas and the individuals who posed the greatest risk. She suggested discreet surveillance, careful monitoring of communications, and documenting any irregular activity without raising suspicion. He agreed, knowing that subtlety would be their most powerful tool. The day wore on, the sun moving across the sky, casting shifting shadows across the office. They barely noticed the passage of time, focused entirely on the task at hand. Each detail, each observation, each plan carried weight. The tension was a constant undercurrent, but it was balanced by the clarity of their purpose and the effectiveness of their combined efforts. She paused for a moment, looking at him, and he noticed the calm determination in her eyes. There was no fear, only focus, a quiet understanding that the danger was real but manageable with the right approach. He felt a surge of gratitude, not just for her warning, but for her ability to act decisively when others might hesitate. It was a rare combination of courage and intelligence, and he knew that it had shifted the balance in their favor. Together, they reviewed the sequence of events that had led to this point. She recounted the conversations, the subtle gestures, and the small anomalies that had hinted at a deeper plot. He analyzed the timing, the potential consequences, and the strategic moves that could counteract the conspirators' plans. The process was meticulous, but necessary. They both understood that missing even a single detail could allow the threat to succeed, as afternoon turned into evening. They began to plan how to confront the situation without alarming the rest of the company. Direct confrontation could provoke panic or even accelerate the conspirators' actions. Instead, they decided on a measured approach, using evidence and observation to subtly neutralize the threat while maintaining the stability of the organization. It required patience, foresight, and unwavering attention to detail. She suggested creating a series of controlled scenarios to test the response of the suspected managers. Observing their reactions without alerting them to suspicion, he approved, noting that their ability to predict behavior would be critical in determining the next steps. Together, they outlined a timeline, allocating responsibilities and ensuring that each action could be executed discreetly and effectively. At one point, a colleague passed by unaware of the tension, and she felt a pang of relief at the normalcy. It was a reminder that life went on outside their focused bubble, and that maintaining the appearance of routine was essential. He nodded at the passing colleague, a silent acknowledgement that the ordinary world remained intact. Even as they navigated extraordinary circumstances, they continued their work late into the evening, reviewing access logs, employee movements, and communication patterns. Every anomaly was noted, every irregularity cross-checked. The depth of their investigation revealed a network of small but deliberate manipulations designed to destabilize his leadership. It was impressive in its detail but flawed in its execution. Relying on assumptions that had overlooked the vigilance of those paying attention, she took a moment to reflect on the skills that had brought them this far. Observation, patience, discretion, and intuition had all played a role. He, in turn, relied on experience, authority, and strategic thinking. Together, they formed a team capable of countering threats that would have overwhelmed a single individual. The combination of their strengths created a protective shield, and they both felt the quiet satisfaction of having discovered it before disaster struck. The night began to settle over the city, casting long shadows across the office floor. They reviewed the evidence one final time for the day, ensuring that nothing had been overlooked. Every potential move, every possible outcome had been considered. They were prepared, vigilant, and united in purpose. The conspirators, if they were unaware, were now being observed from every angle, their plans quietly dismantled before they could be enacted. Finally, they paused, stretching and taking a moment to breathe. The intensity of the day had been exhausting, but the clarity of their work brought a sense of accomplishment. They had transformed panic into preparation, uncertainty into strategy, and danger into opportunity. The narrow escape in the boardroom had set the stage, but their actions now ensured that the next steps would be controlled, deliberate, and effective. He looked at her and smiled faintly, a gesture of respect and recognition. She returned it with a calm nod, acknowledging that their partnership had grown stronger in the crucible of crisis. The work was not over, but the first phase had been successfully managed. They had gained insight, established vigilance, and set the foundation for the next phase of their plan. As they left the office for a brief break, the city lights flickered on outside, illuminating the streets below. Life continued as usual, but for them, the events of the day had changed everything. The trust between them was no longer implicit. It was proven through action, insight, and courage. They knew the challenges ahead would test them further, but they also knew that together, they were ready. The conspirators remained unaware. Their plans partially exposed, their next moves uncertain. But she and he had the advantage now. They had seen what others could not, acted before disaster struck, and forged a bond that would guide them through the next steps. The narrow escape had been more than luck. It had been a product of observation, instinct, and decisive action, and it would shape the events yet to come. The evening was quiet now. The usual office chatter replaced by the soft hum of computers and the occasional clatter of a keyboard. She sat across from him at a small table, spreading out the notes she had gathered over the past days. Each page represented an anomaly, a suspicious action, or a potential lead that could unravel the conspiracy if followed carefully. He leaned forward, studying the information. The lines between fact and speculation drawn clearly but delicately. They began to piece together the timeline, matching movements, conversations, and irregularities with precision. The two senior managers, once unseen in their quiet manipulations, were now becoming figures in a pattern of deceit. Their ambitions had driven them to dangerous actions. Their calculations had overlooked the quiet observer who noticed everything. She explained how they had manipulated schedules, created false impressions, and positioned themselves strategically to strike at the right moment. He listened, mentally noting ways to protect the company while preserving its public image. She pointed out that their sabotage had been subtle but relentless. False entries in reports, miscommunication between departments, and carefully timed disruptions had all been part of a larger plan to destabilize his leadership. She had documented each instance, keeping her observations precise and unambiguous. The care with which she had recorded details impressed him. He realized that without her vigilance, he would have walked blindly into a trap. He asked her what they should do first. She suggested verifying every piece of evidence with hard data, surveillance footage, access logs, and email trails. They needed proof that could withstand scrutiny, proof that could expose the sabotage without harming innocent employees or causing panic. He nodded, appreciating her methodical approach. The plan required patience and precision, and she had both in abundance. They started by reviewing security camera footage. She had already noted times when the managers had been near restricted areas, lingering longer than necessary. As the images played, small anomalies became visible hesitations, suspicious interactions, movements that did not align with the official schedule. He watched quietly, sometimes pointing out details she might have missed, but mostly letting her guide the investigation. Her instincts had led them to this point, and he trusted her judgment completely. Next, they turned to the access logs, noting unusual badge swipes and electronic entries. She had identified moments when access was granted to areas that should have been restricted, often coinciding with the subtle disruptions they had noticed. Together, they cross-referenced the data, building a map of activity that revealed patterns of manipulation. Each connection made the picture clearer, transforming a vague sense of danger into a concrete understanding of the threat. Emails and digital communications were examined carefully. She had anticipated that the managers would attempt to cover their tracks through coded language or vague references. As they sifted through messages, small clues began to emerge. A repeated phrase, a timing anomaly, an unusual attachment all pointed toward deliberate attempts to mislead and manipulate. He was struck by her ability to notice details that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Her perceptive mind piecing together a narrative from fragments of information with every piece of evidence. The conspiracy became clearer. The manager's plan had been ambitious but flawed. They had underestimated her attention to detail and his capacity to act decisively. He realized that the combination of their skills created a defensive wall strong enough to withstand any attempt at sabotage. The narrow escape in the boardroom had been just the beginning. Now they were actively dismantling the plot from the inside. She suggested that they confront HR and the legal team next, sharing the evidence discreetly to initiate an investigation without causing undue alarm. He agreed, noting the importance of following proper procedures to ensure that the response was both effective and legally sound. Together, they prepared a concise but comprehensive report, highlighting the key findings and outlining the steps necessary to secure the company's operations. When they presented their findings to HR and legal, the reaction was a mix of surprise and concern. The evidence was undeniable, and the clarity of the documentation left little room for doubt. The teams quickly agreed to investigate further, securing sensitive areas, monitoring the individuals involved, and taking steps to prevent further interference. She and he remained in the background, guiding the process without drawing attention to themselves, allowing the investigation to proceed on solid ground. While the investigation unfolded, they continued to monitor the company's systems and personnel activity. She noted subtle shifts in behavior among other employees, minor changes in routine that could indicate awareness of the investigation or attempts to assist. He appreciated her vigilance, recognizing that her observational skills were critical not just for identifying the conspirators, but for understanding the broader workplace dynamics. Every small detail mattered, every observation counted. The process was meticulous and slow, but necessary. They did not rush, knowing that the conspirators could attempt to cover their tracks if they felt cornered. Each step was deliberate, each action carefully considered to maintain the integrity of the investigation and to protect innocent employees. Patience became their ally, and their quiet determination created an environment where evidence could be gathered without interference. During one late-night session, she reviewed a series of subtle communications between the managers, noting patterns that suggested attempts to coordinate with others outside the company. She highlighted these connections. Together they traced them to individuals who had no authority to influence the company's operations. The network of manipulation extended further than they had initially thought, and the need for careful intervention became even more apparent. He considered the implications of the expanded conspiracy, recognizing that the threat was not just internal, but had the potential to affect external relations, client trust, and overall company stability. He valued her insight, knowing that her early warning had prevented a crisis and that her continued vigilance would guide them through the unfolding challenges. Her instincts had transformed into actionable intelligence, providing a roadmap to neutralize the threat completely. They continued to document everything meticulously, creating a comprehensive dossier that could withstand scrutiny from any level of investigation. She noted every anomaly, every irregularity, every suspicious behavior with precise timestamps and contextual details. He provided strategic context, explaining the potential impact on the company and guiding the prioritization of actions. The combination of her detailed observations and his leadership created a formidable approach. As the investigation progressed, the conspirators began to sense scrutiny, though they did not know the full extent of the monitoring. She anticipated their reactions, predicting attempts to manipulate communications, adjust schedules, and create diversions. Each predicted move allowed them to prepare a countermeasure, staying one step ahead. The sense of being in control grew, tempered by the awareness that vigilance could not be relaxed. They met late into the evening, reviewing findings, cross-checking data, updating their strategy. She suggested precautionary measures for sensitive operations and recommended discreet communication channels to prevent leaks. He approved, noting the importance of maintaining both operational security and employee confidence. Their coordination became seamless, a silent partnership built on trust, insight, mutual respect. As the night deepened, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the initial warning in the boardroom to the careful dismantling of a hidden conspiracy, every moment had required courage, observation, and decisive action. She had acted instinctively, and he had trusted her judgment. creating a synergy that allowed them to protect the company from a potentially catastrophic event. He, in turn, recognized the value of her skills and the importance of empowering someone whose vigilance could prevent disaster. Leadership was not just about authority. It was about recognizing the strengths of those around you and using them to achieve a shared goal. In this case, her intuition and his strategic thinking had combined to protect not only his position, but the company's future. The investigation reached a point where sufficient evidence had been gathered to take formal action. HR and legal were ready to proceed, backed by the meticulously documented records that she had compiled. They planned to remove the individuals responsible, secure the systems, and ensure that no further manipulation could occur. The conspirators had been exposed without the need for confrontation or panic, and the company's stability was maintained in the quiet aftermath. She and he reviewed the process, noting the lessons learned and the importance of vigilance. The experience had reinforced the value of observation, instinct, and timely action. She felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that her warning had been taken seriously and that her careful attention had prevented a major crisis. He felt gratitude and respect. Recognizing that leadership depended as much on listening and trusting as it did on decision-making,